What is up, YouTube? It is Rosie here, and we need to talk about something near and dear to our hopes and dreams, Elder Scrolls 6. Bethesda's been under a lot of scrutiny recently, and it bothers me that they're pretending nothing's wrong when there clearly is. I've been second-guessing a lot of the things I've said about Starfield and Bethesda recently. A while back, some people were saying that Bethesda doesn't understand what people like about their games, and I responded by saying, trust me everyone, they do. And I gotta tell you, I wouldn't say I was all the way wrong, but I don't think they get it as much as I thought they did. And I think that part of the problem there is a lot of the things that make their great games great are things that are hard to detect in data, so hopefully I can fill in some of the blanks there. So I'm not a game developer, and I don't know for certain what's going on in the Rockville studio, but what I can tell you is how things appear to me from the perspective that I do have, as an expert on this company and their games from the outside looking in. If anyone from Bethesda is watching, I don't ask that you agree with everything I say in these videos. What I do ask is that you listen with an open mind and consider that maybe I see some things that you don't. And I want to be very clear that I am grateful for the work that you guys do and the great times you have given me, but I am going to hold you accountable for your recent issues because I respect you guys enough to tell you the truth. And if there are any other content creators out there and you want to share some thoughts on something I said here in your videos, by all means please do so, but please link back to me and give me some credit. You know, you gotta say, hey, there's this guy with a really deep voice named Rosie, he said this about Elder Scrolls 6, here's what I think about what he said, and so on. So let's get started. Bethesda's most successful game by far is the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Even today, many years after its release, it is still in the top 100 most played games in the world, dwarfing their more recent games by a huge margin. So what factors contributed to Skyrim being such a massive success? To start, Bethesda did a great job of focusing on the right areas when they developed this game. This team understood that content is the top priority for this kind of experience, and Skyrim is loaded with content. The quest lines are great, the side quests might be even better, and that's largely because of the engaging stories they present us with. However, it's just as much because of what the writers chose not to tell us. I'm of course talking about the many mysteries of Skyrim, like who built the Skyforge, what caused the Great Sea Collapse, why doesn't the Dragonborn absorb Alduin's soul, etc. Now, I want to spend some time here, folks, because the contribution that these mysteries make to Skyrim's timelessness is extremely underrecognized. It's almost subconscious, if you will. Like, these unanswered questions, they get into our subconsciouses and keep us thinking about Skyrim. They keep it buried in there, and eventually, you know, it's been months since you're playing, but you see like one of my thumbnails or something on Twitter, and it occurs to you like, you know, I never found out who sends the letters from a friend. I still don't know what caused the Great Sea Collapse, and that gets you thinking about Skyrim again. You know, it reignites that desire to know more about that world, and sure enough, eventually you'll end up going back in and playing again because you're not done. You want more. Yeah, that's what these mysteries do. They make us want more. They curb our curiosity and keep us thinking about Skyrim even when we're not playing, until we're drawn back in. I mean, Far Harbor is widely renowned as one of Bethesda's best ever expansions, and it's loaded to the brim with mystery. What's making the fog worse? Who's the mother of the fog? What happened to Confessor Martin? Is there truth to the children of Adam's religion? And so on. Really, all Bethesda's best DLCs leave us with at least one question. Dawnguard, who are the ideal masters? Mothership Zeta, what do the aliens want with Earth? Dragonborn, what are the Ash Spawn? Point Lookout, what's going on with the occult stuff? Shivering Isles, how exactly did Jiggalai get turned into Sheogorath? And so many more. Also, one of the only things in Starfield that a big portion of players have taken an active interest in is House Faerûn and their Great Serpent, which is the main source of mystique in Starfield. In summary, mysteries are very important. They're a huge part of what drives engagement with Bethesda games, both when we are and are not playing, and a huge part of what eventually draws us back in to play again. Skyrim is the prime example of this. There's mystery around every corner of that game, from the big lore-intensive mysteries like the Great Sea Collapse, to the elaborate social mysteries like who's the mother of Balgruuf's children, the smaller, more practical ones like the Ebony Warrior, who's the client for each Dark Brotherhood contract, And there's even mysteries that the game doesn't force our attention to, but are still there nevertheless, like the origin of Hircine. Even though a lot of players don't consciously realize it, when they start a new playthrough, there is that glimmer of hope that they may realize something that they didn't before about, say, the Skyforge, or that they might overhear a conversation that they've never heard before or long forgotten about, or otherwise that they'll learn something new about the world of Skyrim. Skyrim's many mysteries, from the big lore things like the Skyforge to the little things like the Rorikstead conspiracy, make it so there's always something to be gained from playing again. So yeah, that element of mystique is a huge part of why Skyrim is still so massively popular even now. I really want to make sure to drive this concept home because it's the kind of thing that would be really hard to pick up on with user data and other analytics because the impact is subconscious a lot of the time. But keeping your fans engaged with your IPs like this is extremely valuable in this day and age of gaming, and it's only going to get more valuable as platforms like YouTube and Twitch continue to increase in popularity. And there is a realism to having all these unknowns, which is something we need to discuss because I think Bethesda may be missing the point there. The mysteries do create a sense of realism because there are many things we don't know about our world, like what happens after we die, is there life outside of Earth, and so on. But really, it's the more social mysteries that drive this home, like who exactly is Louis Latruche and the conspiracy of Rorikstead. Those kinds of mysteries create the illusion that the other inhabitants of this world we're exploring have lives, stories, personalities of their own that exist independently of us. So yes, there is a lot of realism here, however, that is not what's important about mysteries. What's important about them is that they make Skyrim interesting. That's what really sets Skyrim apart from other Bethesda games as a setting. For this particular game, Bethesda spent a lot of time doing things to simply make this world interesting. Mysteries are one example of this, and we also need to talk about what I've taken to calling the small things, which includes things like the relationships between the characters, their schedules, their role in the setting, and also things like clutter, items having backstories, environmental storytelling, etc. When it comes to making a setting rich, it's really these small things that actually drive that home. How often do you stop just to listen to these little conversations between the characters? I sure do a whole lot, and you know what? When I'm playing other Bethesda games, I really miss them. Think about how much better Fallout 4 would be if every once in a while Hancock would stop by to talk shop with Murawski, or if you'd come across Hawthorne sometimes out in the wilderness, etc. Those little things enrich the Skyrim experience, and that makes a much bigger difference than most analysts realize it does. Now we should talk a bit about the tech side of things. For Fallout 76 and Starfield, Bethesda really tried to do a whole lot with technology, which required a lot of tech roles, a lot of money, and a lot of time. And because Bethesda dedicated a lot of resources there, the creative process paid the price. And we ended up with 2 games with content that wasn't as good as Fallout 4's and wasn't anywhere near close to the caliber of Skyrim's. The tech, mechanics, and other non-content elements of Skyrim were very simple because Bethesda had their priorities straight. BGS games are at their best when they focus on content and keep the rest simple. In Jeff Gardner's recent interview, he was talking about how a lot in their DLCs, I remember he mentioned Point Lookout specifically, and they were very limited technologically, but their creativity was better. If you look at Bethesda's history, a lot of their best work came when they weren't trying to do so much with technology, and they were letting the content do the talking. And that there is one of the main reasons why no more recent Bethesda game has lived up to Skyrim. Bethesda Rockville started getting very invested in these new ideas like online multiplayer, space exploration, sandbox, and so on, and because they've been so focused on those things, they've strayed away from the fundamentals that their best games are known for. Lots of handcrafting, settings rich with substance both big and small, stories that are interesting, characters that are interesting, and all the other things that make Skyrim so timeless. Additionally, I believe that another reason for this shift away from creativity is that Bethesda has lost a number of people that were key to making Skyrim such a masterpiece. Since Skyrim, they've lost Jeff Gardner, Bruce Nesmith, Joel Burgess, Noah Berry, Jonah Loeb, Nate Perkypile, the list goes on, and now as of Starfield's release, they've parted ways with Will Shen and Kurt Kuhlmann. Not only did Bethesda lose some development legends, they also lost some key voices in the studio that were a big part of steering the team in the right directions, down the paths that led them to their previous successes. But you know folks, people coming and going is something you've got to deal with. It's just business and really just life. But they could look to reunite with some of these people, and I think that would be beneficial. It's worth a phone call. You pick up the phone, say, hey, we want to return to our Skyrim fundamentals. You were on the Skyrim team. Will you come back to work on Elder Scrolls 6? And they say yay or nay, and maybe you got like a Lorax kind of situation going on there. To make Elder Scrolls 6 as great as Skyrim, Bethesda needs to return to their fundamentals, and there are a few additional philosophical changes that I'll suggest as well. A lot of what I'm going to say here is based on things I heard Todd Howard say in his recent interview with Mr. Matty Plays. If you haven't seen that yet, I highly recommend watching that. It's a fantastic interview, very well deserved by Matty. Matty's a YouTuber that I've always looked up to guide me on my journey. I really admire how he's willing to say what he actually thinks without worrying about how it's going to be perceived. Yeah, it's something I need to get better at, and I hope I'm doing that this video. But it's not just that. He's also just a very solid guy. You can tell by how he conducts himself that he's a very nice man, and he really gets what's important in life. He also recently got married. If you haven't said congratulations to him yet, you may want to hit him up on Twitter, say something nice. Yeah, just a great YouTuber, great all-around guy, very well-deserved interview, and very well conducted by him. So philosophical changes. Well, first off, Bethesda always tries to make a significant leap with their technology every game, and I think they should change that to every other game, or even just every few games, and there's a few reasons for that. Development takes a lot longer than it used to, so lots of companies are trying to find ways to save time, and I think part of why Bethesda relied so much on procedural generation for Starfield is because they want to see if they can use that to cut corners. And we all know how that's gone. They're never going to get these systems to a point where they can replace handcrafting, but maybe they can get them to a point where they can print landscapes for AA games. That way they can get some things with the procedural systems out in the meantime between the long development cycles, so they have a source of revenue in there. So how can Bethesda shave a significant amount of time off production cycles? Well, something that I think would help a whole lot is if they weren't focusing so much on tech. A lot of delays that happen in the industry nowadays are because of bugs and other performance issues caused by implementing new technology, and I think that is part of the reason for Starfield's delay. And folks, trying to fix problems like that sucks. It's extremely frustrating, and I imagine that has a very negative impact on team morale. So what if Bethesda didn't try so hard to push the tech needle so much every single game, and instead did that every few games? And for the games that aren't pushing tech, focus on performance improvements to what's already there. If Bethesda did that, I bet they could get Elder Scrolls 6, Fallout 5, and a third game of the same scope out in the next 15 years. Also, as I've already alluded to, if you look at Bethesda's history, their best work is not technologically impressive. It's just a myth that technology has always been a selling point of theirs. It has never been a selling point of theirs. Fallout 3 is a great example. The non-content elements of that game were very simple, yet it was a huge success because the content was great. And a few years later, Obsidian did New Vegas in that same engine, and many people prefer that game to any of Bethesda's Fallouts. Why? Because the content was great. The world is filled to the brim with substance, the characters were thought out, etc. So Bethesda needs to stop making compromises when it comes to content for the sake of meeting these tech goals and instead do the exact opposite. Something I've seen talked about recently is how Oblivion's AI was actually more advanced than Skyrim's, which is true, but some of the things they were trying to do with it didn't really work out. One instance I recall is that in Shivering Isles, Big Head often causes fights because he tries to pickpocket forks from people. So for Skyrim, Bethesda actually scaled back the AI a bit because of issues like that, and I agree with that decision. A lot of critics say that rather than fix the execution problems with that technology, Bethesda just went backward, which I think misses the point. Ultimately, Oblivion's AI, even if it was working well, it didn't really add much to the player's experience. And there are simpler ways to add what little it did to the experience, which Bethesda successfully executed in Skyrim. My guess is that during Skyrim's production, the devs recognized that what they were really trying to do with Oblivion's AI was enrich the experience with an elevated sense of realism. And there are simpler ways to do that, like the little scripted conversations, animations, etc. So they made an informed decision to scale back the tech, which gave them more time and resources to use elsewhere, like on content. And the best part is they didn't sacrifice anything to do it because they found other ways to elevate Skyrim's sense of realism that were easier to execute and frankly were better. This is exactly what I mean by keeping tech simple and prioritizing content over all else. This is the kind of thinking that Bethesda needs to return to for Elder Scrolls 6. In summary, by cutting back on tech, Bethesda can use the time and resources that have been used there recently to reinvest in the creative process. And not pushing the tech needle so much every single game can help get games out faster and can save the whole team a lot of stress. Really, what's the benefit in putting your employees through that every development cycle? People play Bethesda games for content, not fancy tech and tedious mechanics. So what's the benefit in making the team go through the gauntlet of implementing new tech, fixing the problems caused by the new tech, and delaying the game because that's taking too long, and so on every single game when that time could be spent on making quality, rich content? So Bethesda needs to reinvest in the creative process to return to their fundamentals, and that's going to require writers. Something which there is a notable absence of in Starfield's credits, though some may not realize that writing is something that a lot of people end up contributing to even if they're not credited for it. Also, over the past few years, Bethesda has absorbed most of the team's writing tasks into designer roles. So anyone in the credits that's listed with a designer title is likely doing some writing, and I don't think this designers equal writers philosophy needs to end necessarily, but if that's the way it's going to be, then they need to go hire another 20 designers. But given that Elder Scrolls is a lot more writing intensive than their other IPs, I think it would be much wiser to hire a few designated writers along with designers and whatever other creative roles they need. Now, the problem with having a bunch of writers is the mysteries. That kind of writing is much easier to do as an individual rather than as a group, because the more people you have working on it, the less singular the vision, and that can make the dots harder to connect. So how do we solve that problem? Well, we need an overseer, someone with a masterful understanding of Elder Scrolls lore whose job is keeping everyone on the same page, personally doing a lot of the writing for the mysteries themselves, and putting clues in the game so that we the fans can try to solve them. Now, in addition to the big lore mystery kind of writing, they also need to reinvest in the practical writing. A huge part of what makes the world of Skyrim so much more interesting than Bethesda's other settings is that they spent a lot of time on the small things. There's a ton of characters, and they all have some substance to them, even the insignificant ones, like the beggars for instance, they have a bit of flavor. Bethesda also spent a lot of time thinking through everyone's role in the atmosphere of Skyrim. Maven's the crime lord, Irelef's the tough lady, Urag's the know-it-all, etc. And these roles apply to more than just the players' interactions with them. Characters talk to each other, and about each other, and have opinions about what's going on, etc. And I really miss that level of detail when I'm playing other Bethesda games. And again, there is realism to this, but that's not what matters. What matters is the richness it gave Skyrim, how it made that setting interesting. So what happens to that level of detail? Well, I think that part of why Bethesda stopped spending so much time planning the characters and their roles like this is because they started spending a lot more time on a select few characters, mainly companions, which is something they took from Obsidian's New Vegas playbook. Bethesda did a whole lot with companions for Fallout 4. They have quests associated with them, they have lots of dialogue, they even comment on quests they're not immediately involved in. And you know, I do like these more in-depth companions, but ultimately, it's not worth the trade-off. It's not worth losing the richness of walking through a city and passing by a ton of characters that are all memorable, that all have personality, that all have a little role in the atmosphere of that setting, and that interact with each other, and so on. And another thing that I'm not a fan of that I think is a product of this trade-off is how they've started using these nameless NPCs to just fill empty space. They're trying to mimic that feeling that I just described in Skyrim, but it's just not the same. Furthermore, I don't think that Fallout 4-like companions would suit Elder Scrolls from a stylistic standpoint. I think that works in Fallout because that world is a bit sillier, but at the same time a bit more relatable to our world, and I just don't think that would feel right in Elder Scrolls. I think that would feel weird. And there's a lot more to these small things than just the characters. The cities, for instance. If you're paying attention, you'll notice that the cities are all designed in such a way that's designed to give off a certain vibe. Whiterun, for instance, it's a series of circles that gives it this welcoming vibe. And in contrast, say, Windhelm. Windhelm has a lot of jagged edges. It's all very square, a lot of corners, and it's gray, a lot of these dark grays. That gives it this rigid vibe, and that's how the people that live there are, and are very closed-minded, very rigid in how they think. It's really brilliant. Also, a lot of items and locations have these hinted-at backstories, which pertains to mystery as well, but I'll include it in small things too. So, yeah, per se, I remember there's a dwarven structure across a bridge in the Reach somewhere along the Karth River, and it has, I think, a conjuration skill book there, and it's like this gate, so it makes you wonder, like, was this a gate to, like, a Dwemer rune? Did the Dwemer use this for something? Yeah, it's all just, like, these small things make the world so interesting. Moving on, something I've noticed a lot of from Bethesda recently, especially in Starfield, is these attempts to cater to every player's personal preferences, and they seem to be responses to loud voices on platforms like Reddit. The trait system is for players that miss the old school class systems from games like Oblivion. There's all these sandbox or sometimes even tycoonish mechanics for people that like that sort of thing. And the worst offender is these little choices we make at the end of some of the faction lines. This is likely a response to people that wish they had more agency in the Skyrim factions. My problem with what Bethesda did here is it's half-baked. What those players mean is they want choices they make to have a significant impact on their experience of the game, like in New Vegas when you're choosing whether or not to kill Mr. House, or choosing between McNamara and Hardin for the Brotherhood of Steel. But with choosing how to deal with the Terramorphs and deciding what to do about Ron Hope, there are these choices you make at the very end of their quest lines and really just don't change our experience very much. We're just picking the ending we like better without it actually being of consequence to our playthrough. It's as if Bethesda's trying to trick those players that were making that suggestion into thinking they got what they wanted, but really just gave them these tiny narrative choices in addition to their traditional faction structure. So I think Bethesda needs to stop trying so hard to go above and beyond for every niche gameplay preference and just focus on most people, because I believe this is part of what's contributing to them falling short creatively. So how can they determine what's going to result in the most enjoyment for the most players possible? By asking a simple question: what's the Skyrim thing to do? This is the game that sold 60 million copies and is still massively popular 13 years after its initial release. So when in doubt, go with the Skyrim thing to do. Another thing we need to talk about is every once in a while when Todd Howard is talking about conceiving the ideas for 76 and Starfield, he'll say something along the lines of, "It's a game we'd want to play." But who exactly is we? There's a Kotaku article we need to look at here called "The Human Toll of Fallout 76's Disastrous Launch." I'll link it below. By the way, the author and editor seem to have made some oopsies here, so I'm just going to fix them in my read. In June 2019, Howard gave an IGN interview about how it was a game that we wanted to play. In reality, sources said that morale was also very low among some former Fallout 4 developers who were assigned to work on it. They joined Bethesda's Rockville studio because they were fans of the studio's single-player games, but now they were working in a genre they had little interest in. Two sources told Kotaku that many former Fallout 4 developers they knew especially resented being assigned to make a live service game. These were veterans who'd spent many years at a studio that was famous for prestigious single-player RPGs. So if industry veterans were not part of this "we" that Todd refers to, then who was? I can only assume that "we" is the decision makers at Bethesda, the upper brass if you will. And I mean, now that the Rockville studio has a few hundred employees, they can't involve every single one of them in every decision, but they do all need to be inspired by what they're working on, or else the finished product is just gonna be bad, it's gonna be crap. We're going to dive further into that in a hot minute, but first I need to finish what I was saying about the upper brass making decisions based on this "what we'd want to play" mentality. So Todd and whoever else, I mean no offense folks, but you guys are a bunch of dads. I'd never want you to have to work on something that you wouldn't want to play because again, everyone needs to be inspired, but you need to balance that with what nerdy types ages 12 to 25 want to play, or else you're just following a recipe for disaster. Starfield, for instance, a space exploration game where you fly around, you survey planets, and it has a lot of simulation-like qualities. I totally see how an 80s AV Club arcade kind of nerd would like that idea. A nerdy dad or like a middle school science teacher would think the technology of that is like the coolest thing. But your average 90s and early 2000s nerds are gonna think that kind of thing is really boring and really basic. If we're not surrounded by interesting content or gameplay, we are going to get very bored very fast. So, I mean no offense to Todd, Emil, or any dads out there. I actually hope to be a dad myself someday if I'm lucky enough to meet the right woman, but keep in mind that your perception of what's cool isn't always going to be the same as what your target audience thinks is cool. And that's another reason why you need to listen to the junior members of your staff. You need that young perspective, along with their inspiration. We also need to dive further into inspiration. Game development is an art, and for art to be good, the artist must be inspired by what they're creating. If they aren't, that will show, and the art will stink, and I think that some of Bethesda's recent writing and design woes in 76 and Starfield are the result of a lack of inspiration. I found that a lot of the smaller missions in Starfield were just awful. One example that comes to mind is the boot, where we get this supposedly cursed pair of boots and we have to get rid of them. When I first got this quest, I was excited because there's a bit of mystery to it, like, oh, what's going on with these boots, I wonder. But all we do is take them to the den and have our choice of putting them in this box or selling them to this guy that's just hanging out back there. At first I put them in the box, then the quest just ended. So I was like, maybe I'll try selling them to this guy and see if that gives me more. It still ends the quest and the guy eventually mysteriously dies. So I was stunned for a second trying to process what I just experienced, and then it just clicked and I thought to myself, that was terrible. What part of this was supposed to be fun for me? The part where this character that barely has any flavor gave me the boots? The part where I looked at a loading screen? Or the part where I had the option of putting these boots in a box or giving them to this character with a bit of flavor, but not much? I can't believe this made it into the game, and it's not the only mission that's this bad. So what happened here? Well, I think that some of these terrible missions are the work of junior level designers that were sitting there thinking, man, I really wish I was working on Elder Scrolls 6 instead of this space game that only the senior level people actually care about. So I got that vibe from a lot of the minor Starfield missions, but what about Fallout 76? Well, here's another quote from the same article I mentioned before. However, sources told Kotaku the misalignment between the business goal and the actual team members proved to be devastating for morale. One source felt that there was a feeling that we were making a game that wasn't primarily for us, or even the fans. So that says it all. There was a lack of inspiration here. People that were on the 76 team were not happy about it. They were sitting there at their desks thinking, I worked my way into this legendary studio because I wanted to make main series Fallout and Elder Scrolls games, but instead I'm working on this cash grab. So what needs to change here? Well, first off, assuming that I'm correct about this lack of inspiration on 76 and Starfield stemming from a systemic issue starting with the decision makers of the studio, well, they need to take accountability for that if they haven't already. And now going into Elder Scrolls 6, they need to come together as a studio and draft a vision for a game that every one of them would want to play, not just the dad squad, the whole team. And I promise you will be shocked by what a huge positive difference it will make once they have a studio full of people that are inspired by what they're working on and are happy to be there. The games will be better, we'll stop seeing articles like this, and so on. They also need to get some young minds into that decision-making room, which seems likely now that there are positions to fill. So I'm not in the studio, I can't tell you for certain what's going on in there, but what I can tell you from the outside looking in is that it appears to me that there are major systemic issues going on in there, and it appears that they do start with the upper brass, with people like Emil Pagliarulo, Tim Lamb, and Todd Howard himself. I'm losing faith in these people as the decision makers of the studio, and that has me very scared for the future. So I think that Joe Braff and Microsoft execs like Matt Booty and maybe even Phil Spencer himself need to step in here and make changes. In regard to that, I also want to talk for a bit here about the Kurt Kuhlmann situation. For those who aren't aware, Kurt was the lead systems designer at Bethesda Rockville, and he's often talked about as one of the prominent visionaries of Elder Scrolls. But shortly after Starfield's release, Bethesda asked him to leave the company, and he did. Neither Bethesda nor Kurt have commented on the situation. So disclaimer here, everything I say beyond this point is speculation. I do not know why Kurt was asked to leave or who specifically was involved in that decision. But there is a disturbing possibility here that I think we need to discuss. I'm afraid that some of the other senior developers, like maybe Todd, maybe Emil, who knows, asked Kurt to leave because he was telling them exactly what I'm telling you in this video and the next one. I'm very concerned that he was saying what we've done the past two major releases isn't working. We need to return to our Skyrim fundamentals. We need to stop trying to wow people with technical marvels and instead entertain them with quality, rich content. We need to put an end to this big for the sake of big approach with our scales and aim for about what we did for Skyrim, and so on. So again, I don't know why Kurt was asked to leave. But if the scenario I just described is the case, then Joe Braff, Matt Booty, and whoever else need to get him back by any means necessary, and put him in charge of Elder Scrolls 6. Because if that is indeed what happens, then the takeaway there, what that means, is that Kurt understands how to make successful Elder Scrolls games and the other senior devs do not. If the people currently in charge of Elder Scrolls 6 plan to continue deviating from Skyrim fundamentals, then I guarantee you this game will be a disaster. Then Microsoft will have to make some grave decisions about the future of this studio, the people that work there, and their IPs. And the sad reality here is if Bethesda legends like Emil or even Todd himself need to work under Kurt or even be taken off the project entirely to prevent it from failing, then that's what needs to happen. That is a better outcome than not meeting expectations for another major release. But it's very possible that is not why Kurt was asked to leave. I have at times gotten the vibe that maybe he's not a popular guy in the studio. A lot of brilliant creative minds are difficult people to work with. I've actually heard this about Kirkbride. So maybe Kurt can be that way, who knows. But to cite some wisdom from Dengir of Stun, Bethesda might as well go with the difficult person that they know and that knows Elder Scrolls, rather than roll the dice on a new person. Or maybe Kurt's not hard to work with at all and the problem is something else. So those are some philosophical adjustments I suggest that Bethesda and Microsoft consider. In the next video, we're going to get into some specifics about how I think Bethesda should approach the S6 both technically and creatively. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, leave a like, and share this with other fans so that we can save Elder Scrolls 6. See you in the next one.